Old woman, I'm not cooking for you every single day. That's what my daughter-in-law screamed at me, right before she poured a bucket of soapy water all over my head. The cold liquid ran down my hair, across my face, and soaked the thin sweater I had been wearing since morning. For a moment I just stood there in the kitchen, dripping, stunned. Then she laughed. Maybe now you'll clean yourself, she said, rolling her eyes. You're not a queen. If you want food, cook it yourself. I'm Margaret Collins, and I'm 72 years old. And that moment, standing in my own kitchen, soaked in soap water, was the moment I realized something very important. My son and his wife thought I was just a helpless old woman. They had no idea that everything around them, the walls, the roof, the land under their feet, still legally belonged to me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before I tell you what happened next, and believe me, what I did shocked everyone, please take a second to subscribe to the channel and stay with me until the end. Stories like mine deserve to be heard, especially for people who think kindness toward the elderly doesn't matter. Now let me tell you how it all started. 3 years ago, after my husband Richard passed away, the house became very quiet. Too quiet. Richard and I had built that little 2-story home in Columbus, Ohio nearly 40 years ago. Every corner of it held memories. Sunday breakfasts, Christmas mornings, the sound of our son Daniel running down the stairs as a little boy. After Richard died, Daniel insisted I shouldn't live alone. Mom, he said gently, you're getting older. Why don't Emily and I move in? We'll take care of you. At the time, it sounded like love. I remember hugging him that day, feeling grateful that I had raised such a caring son. So they moved in. At first, everything seemed normal. Emily, my daughter-in-law, would smile politely. Daniel helped with groceries. We shared dinners at the same table. But slowly things changed. Emily stopped smiling. Then she stopped talking. Then she started complaining. She leaves the lights on. She uses too much hot water. She's always in the living room. At first she said these things quietly to Daniel. I could hear them whispering through the walls at night. Then the whispers turned into arguments. Then the arguments turned into insults. One evening she slammed a plate on the table and snapped. You know, most people your age live in retirement homes. I pretended not to hear. Because mothers protect their sons, even when it hurts. But the worst part wasn't Emily. The worst part was Daniel's silence. He never defended me. He just sat there, staring at his phone, pretending nothing was happening. Over the months, the house that Richard and I built with love started feeling like a place where I was no longer welcome. Emily began locking the pantry. She stopped cooking meals for me. And whenever guests came over, she introduced me like I was a burden. This is Daniel's mom. She lives with us. Lives with us. Not owns the house. Just lives with us. But I said nothing. Not yet. Because I was waiting. You see, there was one small detail my son and his wife had completely forgotten. When Richard died, he left the house entirely in my name. Daniel never asked about the paperwork. Emily never cared. And I never corrected them. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay quiet while people show you who they really are. And then came the day that everything exploded. The day Emily screamed those words in my face. Old woman, I'm not cooking for you anymore. And the day she dumped soap water over my head in my own kitchen. But what happened 2 days later made her fall to her knees begging. Because that afternoon, I packed a suitcase, called my daughter, and sent a legal notice that would change their lives overnight. But before I tell you what was written in that notice, and how my son and daughter-in-law reacted when they read it, you need to hear what happened the night I left that house. Because that night, they thought they had finally gotten rid of me. They had no idea. I was about to take everything back. That night, after my daughter-in-law dumped that bucket of soapy water over my head, I didn't scream. I didn't argue. And I didn't cry in front of them. I simply stood there in the kitchen while soap dripped from my hair onto the floor. My sweater clung to my skin, and the smell of cheap lemon detergent filled the air. Emily crossed her arms and smirked. Maybe now you'll finally stop acting like this house is your palace, she said. I slowly wiped my face with the edge of a towel and looked at my son. Daniel. The little boy I once carried in my arms. The child I stayed up all night with when he had fevers. The boy whose scraped knees I kissed when he fell off his bicycle. He stood there leaning against the counter, staring at the floor. He didn't say a single word. Not one. That silence hurt more than the soap in my eyes. Finally, Emily sighed dramatically. Daniel, tell her already. We can't keep doing this. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck like he always did when he was uncomfortable. Mom, maybe Emily's right, he muttered. Those words felt like a door quietly closing somewhere deep inside my chest. He continued speaking, but he couldn't even look at me. You know, maybe it's time you started thinking about other living arrangements. Other living arrangements. In the house I had paid for. In the home where he had grown up. For a moment, the kitchen was completely silent except for the sound of water dripping from my clothes onto the tile floor. Then Emily laughed softly. See, even Daniel agrees. We're not running a retirement home. I nodded slowly. Not because I agreed, but because I understood something very clearly now. My son wasn't going to protect me, so I would protect myself. Without another word, I turned around and walked upstairs. Behind me, I heard Emily whisper loudly enough for me to hear. Finally. In my bedroom, I closed the door and sat on the edge of my bed. My hands were shaking slightly, but my mind felt strangely calm. Very calm. Because something inside me had finally decided that enough was enough. I opened my closet and pulled out a small suitcase. It was the same one Richard and I used when we traveled to Florida years ago. As I folded my clothes, memories filled the room. Richard's voice. Daniel laughing as a child. Family dinners around the table downstairs. All of it felt like another lifetime. But life has a strange way of showing you who people really are when you become inconvenient to them. And tonight, my son and his wife had made their feelings perfectly clear. By the time I finished packing, it was nearly midnight. The house was quiet. I picked up my phone and called the one person I knew would answer, no matter the hour. My daughter, Laura. She picked up on the second ring. Mom, is everything okay? For a moment my throat tightened, but I forced myself to stay calm. Sweetheart, I said gently. Do you still have that guest room ready? There was a pause. Then her voice immediately filled with concern. Mom, what happened? I looked around my bedroom one last time. The room where Richard and I had spent decades together. Then I took a deep breath. I'll tell you everything when I get there, I said softly. But I'm leaving tonight. Laura didn't hesitate. Come here. Right now. When I carried my suitcase downstairs, the living room lights were still on. Emily and Daniel were sitting on the couch watching television. Emily glanced at the suitcase and raised an eyebrow. Well, look at that, she said with a smirk. Guess she finally got the message. Daniel looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. Again. I stopped at the door and turned back to them. For a moment, I simply looked at my son. Then I said quietly, Don't worry. I won't be a burden to you anymore. Emily rolled her eyes. Good. I nodded once, opened the door, and stepped out into the cold night. But as I placed my suitcase in the back seat of Laura's car, one thought kept repeating in my mind. Emily believed she had won. She thought the house was finally hers. What she didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that the very next morning, I was going to visit a lawyer. And within 48 hours, my son and his wife would receive a letter that would make them panic. A letter that said only one thing. You have 2 days to vacate the property. And when they realized the house was legally mine, they would come running to my daughter's doorstep, begging, crying, falling at my feet. But by then, it would already be too late. The next morning, I woke up in my daughter Laura's guest room with the sunlight shining through the curtains. For the first time in months, I slept peacefully. No whispers through the walls. No door slamming. No daughter-in-law sighing loudly every time I walked into the kitchen. Just silence. Laura was already in the kitchen making coffee when I walked downstairs. The smell reminded me of the quiet mornings I used to have with Richard. She turned around the moment she saw me. Mom, tell me what happened. So I told her. Everything. From the constant insults, to the locked pantry, to the moment Emily dumped a bucket of soapy water over my head like I was some kind of stray animal. Laura's face slowly turned red with anger. What? She said, slamming her mug onto the counter. I gently placed my hand over hers. "It's all right," I said calmly. But Laura shook her head. "No, Mum. It's not all right. You took care of Daniel your whole life. How could he let someone treat you like that?" That was the question I had asked myself all night. But I didn't want to think about Daniel anymore. Because that morning, I had something far more important to do. "I need you to drive me somewhere," I said. Laura narrowed her eyes. "Where?" I took a sip of coffee and answered quietly. "To see a lawyer." An hour later we were sitting in a small law office downtown. The man behind the desk introduced himself as Mr. Harrison, a calm, gray-haired attorney who had probably seen every kind of family conflict imaginable. I placed a folder on his desk. Inside it were documents I had kept safe for years. The deed to the house. Richard had insisted on something very specific before he passed away. "Margaret," he told me back then, "this house stays in your name. Always." At the time I didn't think much about it. Now it meant everything. Mr. Harrison adjusted his glasses and began reading the documents carefully. After a few minutes he looked up at me. "Well, Mrs. Collins," he said slowly, "this is very clear." My heart beat a little faster. "The property is entirely in your name. Your son has no legal ownership of the house." Laura leaned forward immediately. "So that means they can't stay there if Mom doesn't want them to?" Mr. Harrison nodded. "Correct." Then he added something that made Laura smile for the first time that day. "If Mrs. Collins wishes, she can issue a formal eviction notice." For a moment, the room was silent. Mr. Harrison folded his hands. "Now normally we allow tenants 30 days, he explained. But since they have no rental agreement, and are technically living there by permission." He paused. "The notice period can be significantly shorter." I slowly looked up. "How short?" I asked. He thought for a moment. 48 hours would be legally acceptable. Laura let out a quiet laugh. But I didn't laugh. Because suddenly I remembered Emily's voice in the kitchen. "Old woman, I'm not cooking for you anymore." I remembered the cold soap running down my face. I remembered my son standing there, saying nothing. My hands rested calmly on the desk as I spoke. "Prepare the notice." Mr. Harrison nodded. Within 15 minutes, the document was printed and ready. The words were simple. "You are hereby notified that you must vacate the property within 48 hours. I signed my name at the bottom. Margaret Collins, the legal owner of the house. Mr. Harrison slid the envelope toward me. "All that's left," he said, "is delivering it." Laura looked at me with a small grin. "Mom, do you want me to take it over there?" I shook my head. "No." I stood up slowly and picked up the envelope. "I think they should hear it from someone official." That afternoon, a courier delivered the letter directly to my front door, right into Emily's hands. Laura and I were sitting in her living room when my phone started ringing. Over and over. "Daniel." Then again. "Daniel." Then again. "Emily." Laura looked at the screen and smirked. "Well, looks like they got the letter." I didn't answer. But a few minutes later, Laura's doorbell rang. Then came loud knocking. "Mom." Mom opened the door. Daniel's voice sounded desperate. Laura looked at me. "Do you want me to tell them to leave?" I stood up slowly and walked toward the door. Because after everything they had done, it was time they looked me in the eyes. But when I opened the door, what I saw shocked even me. My son was standing there with tears in his eyes. And Emily, the same woman who poured soap on me just yesterday, was suddenly on her knees, begging. But what she said next made the entire situation even worse. And in that moment I realized they still hadn't learned their lesson. Not yet. And what I did next made sure they never forgot it again. When I opened Laura's front door, the first thing I saw was my son's face. Daniel looked completely different from the confident man who had stood silently in the kitchen just 2 nights earlier. His hair was messy, his eyes were red, and his hands were shaking. But what shocked me even more was what was happening beside him. Emily, my daughter-in-law, the same woman who had dumped soapy water on my head and called me an old woman, was on her knees on my daughter's porch. The moment the door opened, she grabbed the bottom of my coat. "Mom, please," she cried. Laura gasped behind me. I looked down at her calmly. It was strange how quickly people change their tone when their comfort is threatened. Just 2 days ago, this same woman had rolled her eyes at me like I was an inconvenience in my own house. Now her mascara was running down her face. "Please don't do this to us," Emily begged. "We didn't know the house was still in your name." There it was. Not "I'm sorry for how I treated you." Not "I regret what I did." Just fear. Fear of losing the house. Daniel finally stepped forward. "Mom, can we talk?" His voice sounded small, almost like the little boy I used to tuck into bed years ago. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me so Laura wouldn't have to hear the rest. For a moment, none of us spoke. Emily was still kneeling on the porch. Daniel kept rubbing his hands together nervously. Finally he said quietly, "Mom, the letter says we only have 2 days." "That's correct," I replied calmly. Emily started crying harder. "We have nowhere to go," she said dramatically. I raised an eyebrow. "That's interesting," I said slowly. "Because 2 nights ago you seemed very confident I should find somewhere else to live." Daniel winced. "Mom, please." Emily quickly stood up and tried a different approach. Her crying suddenly softened. Her voice became sweet. Manipulative sweet. "You know I didn't mean those things," she said. "We were just stressed. You know how life is." I looked at her quietly. Life is stressful. But stress doesn't make people pour soap on someone's head. Emily stepped closer to me. "Mom," she continued, trying to sound warm, "we're family. Families forgive each other." I could see Daniel nodding behind her. They both thought this was working. But I had spent 72 years learning how to read people. And what I saw in Emily's eyes wasn't regret. It was calculation. She wasn't sorry. She was scared. And suddenly Daniel blurted something out. "This isn't fair, Mom." Emily quickly turned toward him in shock, but it was too late. He kept talking. "You can't just throw us out like this. We've been living there for 3 years. For a moment, I simply stared at him. 3 years, I repeated softly. Then I asked a question. "Daniel, in those 3 years, how many times did you defend me when your wife insulted me?" He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Emily immediately jumped in. Daniel didn't know how bad things were. I looked straight at her. "Really?" I said. Then I turned back to my son. "So you didn't hear her when she told me I should go to a retirement home?" Silence. "You didn't hear her lock the pantry?" More silence. "You didn't see her pour soap on me in the kitchen?" Daniel's face collapsed. But Emily suddenly snapped. "Oh, come on." Her sweet mask disappeared instantly. "You're acting like we committed a crime," she shouted. "There it is," I said quietly. Her real voice. Her real face. Daniel looked horrified. "Emily, stop," he whispered. But she was already angry. "You're really going to make your own son homeless at your age?" She snapped at me. "What kind of mother does that?" I took a slow breath. Then I said something that made both of them freeze. The kind of mother who finally learned her worth. For a moment no one spoke. Then I stepped back toward the door. "You have 48 hours, I said calmly. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. Emily's face turned pale. But just as I was about to go inside, Emily said something behind me that made me stop. Something cruel. Something she should never have said. And the moment those words left her mouth, I realized I had been too kind. So what I decided to do next didn't just take the house back. It taught them a lesson they would remember for the rest of their lives. I was about to step back inside my daughter Laura's house when Emily said something behind me that made my hand freeze on the door handle. Her voice was low, but sharp enough to cut through the quiet evening. "Honestly," she muttered, "this is exactly why old people shouldn't live with family. They just become bitter and useless." For a moment, the world went completely silent. I slowly turned around. Daniel looked like someone had punched him in the stomach. "Emily, stop," he whispered. But she wasn't finished. Maybe she was angry. Maybe she thought she had already lost everything. Or maybe that was simply who she really was. "You think you're teaching us a lesson?" she continued, crossing her arms. "You're just a lonely old woman who got lucky with paperwork. Lucky. After 40 years of paying the mortgage. After raising the son standing right in front of her. After building the home she was begging to stay in. Daniel looked horrified. "Emily, that's enough," he said. But the damage was already done. I looked at her calmly. For the first time since this entire situation began, I actually felt something different. Not anger. Not sadness. Just certainty. I stepped down from the porch and walked closer to them. Emily straightened her back, trying to look confident again. "You can glare all you want," she said. "It's still unfair." I tilted my head slightly. "Unfair," I repeated softly. Then I looked directly at my son. "Daniel, do you remember the day your father finished building the back porch?" He blinked, confused by the question. "Mom, what does that have to do with?" "You were 8 years old," I continued gently. "You ran outside and told him it was the best house in the world." Daniel's eyes softened slightly. "I remember," he said quietly. I nodded. "Your father worked 3 jobs that year to pay for the materials." I paused. "And when he got sick, who stayed up every night helping him breathe?" Daniel swallowed hard. "You did," he whispered. I nodded again. "Yes, I did." Emily shifted impatiently. "Oh my God, here comes the emotional speech." I ignored her completely. "Your father made one very important decision before he passed away," I continued. Daniel wiped his eyes. "The house," he said slowly. "Yes," I replied. I took a deep breath. "He put the house in my name so I would always be safe." For a moment, the wind moved softly through the trees around Laura's yard. Then I said the one thing Emily didn't expect. "But yesterday, I realized something." Emily rolled her eyes. "And what's that?" I looked straight at her. I was too generous. Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. Then I calmly opened an email. "Before you came here tonight," I said quietly, "I spoke to my lawyer again." Emily's confidence suddenly cracked. What are you talking about?" I kept my voice steady. "You see, the 48-hour notice was simply the minimum legal requirement." Daniel looked confused. "Minimum?" I nodded. "Yes." Then I explained something they clearly didn't know. When people refuse to leave a property after an eviction notice, the court can send assistance. Emily's eyes widened. "Assistance," she repeated. I locked my phone and looked at them both. "Moving crews." Daniel froze. "And police officers," I added calmly. Emily's face went completely pale. "You wouldn't dare." But I simply smiled softly. "I already did." Daniel's voice trembled. "Mom, please tell me you didn't." I looked at him with the same calm expression. "Tomorrow morning," I said. "2 trucks will arrive at the house." Emily shook her head violently. No, you can't do that." Daniel looked like he might collapse. "Mom, please, we'll leave. We promise. Just cancel it." For the first time that evening, Emily grabbed my hands. But now it wasn't manipulation. It was pure panic. "Please," she whispered desperately. I gently pulled my hands away. "You had your chance to show kindness," I said. Then I stepped back toward the door again. "But tomorrow, the house will finally be peaceful again." Daniel began crying quietly. Emily looked like she might faint. But just before I walked inside, Daniel said something that completely broke my heart. Something that made me realize the situation was even worse than I thought. And what I discovered the next morning, when the trucks arrived at the house, was something none of us expected. Not even me. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. At my daughter Laura's house, the world was quiet. The soft light coming through the kitchen window painted the room in pale gold. Laura was already making coffee, and the smell reminded me of calmer days. But today was not a calm day. Today was the day my son and his wife had to leave my house. Laura placed a mug in front of me and gently squeezed my shoulder. "Mom, are you sure you're ready for this?" I looked down at the steam rising from the coffee. "No mother is ever ready to do this to her own child," I said quietly. Then I lifted my head. "But sometimes, being a mother also means teaching the hardest lesson." Laura nodded slowly. At exactly 8 a.m. my phone buzzed. It was the lawyer. "The movers and officers have arrived at the property," he said calmly. "You may come if you wish." My heart tightened. For a moment, I almost said no. But then I remembered the soap running down my hair. Emily's voice. Old woman, I'm not cooking for you every day. I stood up. Yes, I told the lawyer. I'm coming. 20 minutes later, Laura and I pulled up near the house. My house. The same house where I had raised Daniel. The same porch where he learned to ride his bicycle. The same kitchen where I cooked thousands of meals for him. But today, the street looked different. 2 large moving trucks were parked in front, and a police car stood quietly by the curb. A few neighbors had already stepped outside. Curtains were moving in windows. People were watching. Laura looked at me nervously. You don't have to get out if you don't want to. But I opened the car door. No, I said softly. I need to see this through. As we walked up the driveway, the front door suddenly flew open. Emily rushed out. Her hair was messy, her makeup smeared like she hadn't slept at all. And the moment she saw me, she exploded. This is insane, she shouted. You called the police on your own family? One of the officers calmly stepped forward. Ma'am, please lower your voice. Emily pointed directly at me. She's doing this out of revenge. I remained quiet. Then Daniel appeared behind her. The moment I saw his face, my heart cracked a little. He looked exhausted. Eyes red. Shoulders heavy. Mom, he said quietly. For a moment, I saw the little boy he used to be. But then Emily grabbed his arm again. Don't start begging now, she snapped. Daniel pulled his arm away. Emily, stop. The officer spoke calmly. Sir, the eviction notice has expired. The moving company is authorized to begin removing belongings. One of the movers stepped toward the door. Emily suddenly blocked the entrance. No. Nobody is touching my things. The officer sighed. Ma'am, you've been given legal notice. This is harassment, she screamed. Then she turned toward me again. You're doing this because you're bitter. The neighbors were definitely watching now. Someone across the street even stepped onto their lawn. Emily didn't care. You think this makes you powerful? She shouted. I took a slow breath. Then I finally spoke. No, I said calmly. This makes me free. Emily laughed bitterly. Free? From what? I looked directly into her eyes. From living with someone who has no respect. For a moment, she had no answer. Then the movers began walking inside the house. Emily tried to push past the officer, but he gently stopped her. Ma'am, please cooperate. Daniel suddenly turned to me again. Mom, please, he said quietly. His voice cracked. We'll go. Just don't let strangers throw our things out. My heart hurt hearing that. But I kept my voice steady. You had 2 days, Daniel. Emily scoffed. Oh, please stop acting like a victim, she snapped at him. And that was the moment something changed. Daniel slowly turned toward her. His eyes weren't sad anymore. They were angry. Emily, he said firmly. She rolled her eyes. What now? Daniel pointed toward the house. Start packing. She stared at him like she'd never seen him before. You're siding with her? He shook his head slowly. No. Then he said something that shocked everyone standing there. Something I never expected my son to say. I'm siding with what's right. Emily's face went white. But the real shock came 10 minutes later, when one of the movers walked out of the house holding a small wooden box. A box Emily had opened the night before. A box that was never supposed to be touched. And what was inside it changed the entire situation again. The mover stepped carefully down the front porch, holding a small wooden box in both hands. The moment I saw it, my breath caught. That box. I hadn't seen it in years. It was old, dark walnut wood, with small carvings along the edges that my husband had made himself. Inside that box were things I kept hidden from the world. Memories, letters, documents, and some things that were never meant to be touched. The mover looked confused. Ma'am, he said, looking at me. Where would you like this? Before I could answer, Emily suddenly rushed forward. That's ours, she snapped. The mover frowned. It was in the bedroom closet. Emily tried to grab it from his hands. But the police officer stepped in front of her again. Ma'am, step back. My eyes stayed locked on that box. Slowly, I walked toward the mover. That belongs to me, I said calmly. Emily scoffed loudly. Oh please, she said. Everything in that house isn't automatically yours. I didn't answer her. Instead, I carefully took the box from the mover's hands. For a moment, my fingers ran across the carved wood. My husband's carvings. Daniel watched quietly. "Mom," he said softly. But Emily wasn't done. "What's even in there?" she asked sarcastically. "More old junk." She laughed. Then she said something that made my stomach drop. "I already looked inside last night anyway." My head snapped up. "You what?" For the first time since the morning began, my voice had real anger in it. Emily crossed her arms proudly. "Oh, relax," she said. "It's not like there was anything exciting." Daniel turned toward her slowly. "You opened Mom's things?" Emily shrugged. "Well, someone had to see if there was anything valuable." Daniel looked horrified. "You went through her private box?" Emily rolled her eyes again. "Oh, stop acting dramatic." But I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. "Did you touch the envelopes?" I asked quietly. Emily frowned. "What envelopes?" My stomach twisted. "There were 3 sealed envelopes," I said. She shrugged again. "I don't remember." Daniel rubbed his forehead. "Emily." Then she said something that made the officer look up. "Well, I might have opened 1 or 2, she muttered. My hands tightened around the box. "Which one?" I asked slowly. Emily thought for a second. "The one with the bank logo, I think." Daniel froze. "What bank logo?" Emily pointed casually. "There was a document inside. Something about a trust or whatever." The officer and the movers had gone completely silent now. Daniel looked at me. "Mom, what trust?" I slowly opened the box. Inside were old photographs, letters from my husband, and 3 large envelopes. But now, one of them was torn open. My heart sank. Emily pointed again. "Yeah, that one." Daniel leaned closer. "What was in it?" I took a slow breath. Then I carefully pulled out the document. The paper shook slightly in my hands. Because this wasn't just any paper. It was something my husband and I created years ago. Something we never told Daniel about. Emily crossed her arms impatiently. "Well." I looked directly at my son. "This," I said quietly, "is the family trust." Daniel blinked. "The what?" Emily laughed again. "Oh, please don't tell me this is about money." I looked straight at her. "It is." Now she was interested. "How much?" Daniel looked uncomfortable. "Emily." But she stepped closer. "No, seriously," she said. "How much money are we talking about?" I folded the paper slowly. Then I said something that made her smile disappear instantly. "This trust controls the house, and everything connected to it." Daniel looked shocked. "Everything?" I nodded. "The property, the savings account, and your father's investment fund." Emily's eyes widened. "Wait, investment fund?" Then she asked the question she had been waiting for. "How much is in it?" I looked at her calmly. "Enough to change someone's life." For the first time all morning, Emily looked nervous. "Okay, so what?" I closed the box gently. Then I said the one thing she definitely didn't expect. "You weren't supposed to see that document yet." Daniel frowned. "Why?" I looked at him quietly. "Because the trust has a condition." Emily laughed nervously. "Oh God, here comes the drama." But I didn't smile. "The condition," I continued slowly, "decides who inherits everything." Daniel's voice was barely a whisper. "Who?" I looked at him. "It was originally written for you." Emily's face lit up. "See? I told you." But I continued speaking. "And your wife." She grinned proudly. But then I finished the sentence. "As long as certain rules were followed." Daniel's smile faded. "What rules?" I held the torn envelope in my hand. Then I said the truth. "The rules about how family members must treat each other." Emily's confident expression slowly cracked. "What does that mean?" I looked straight into her eyes. "It means, the trust has already been reviewed by my lawyer." Daniel's heart seemed to stop. "And?" he asked. I took a slow breath. "And because of what has happened?" Emily's voice trembled. "What happened?" I closed the box completely. Then I said the sentence that made her face turn completely pale. "The inheritance might no longer belong to you." Emily stared at me in shock. Daniel looked like he couldn't breathe. But what my lawyer told me later that afternoon, about the trust, was even more shocking. Something that would completely decide who keeps the house forever. And someone standing there that morning was about to lose everything. Emily stared at me like the ground had just disappeared under her feet. The inheritance might not belong to us? She repeated slowly. For the first time since I had known her, the confidence in her voice was gone. Daniel looked back and forth between us, completely confused. Mom, he said, his voice shaking, please explain. The movers had stopped working again. Even the neighbors standing across the street were whispering to each other. Everyone could feel that something serious had just happened. I held the wooden box close to my chest and took a slow breath. Years ago, I began quietly, your father and I created a family trust. Daniel listened carefully. Emily crossed her arms, but I could see her eyes were glued to the box. We didn't want to simply leave money behind, I continued. We wanted to leave values behind. Daniel nodded slowly. That sounds like Dad. I smiled sadly. Yes, it does. Then I looked directly at him. The trust says that everything, this house, the investment accounts, the savings your father built, would eventually pass to you. Emily's face lit up again. Exactly, she said quickly. So what's the problem? But I continued. As long as one condition was always met. Daniel frowned. What condition? I spoke slowly so every word was clear. The family home must always remain a place of respect and care for its elders. Emily scoffed. That's ridiculous. But Daniel didn't laugh. He looked nervous. What happens if that rule is broken? He asked quietly. I looked down at the document again. Then I answered honestly. If the elder owner is mistreated or forced to leave the home. Emily's eyes widened slightly. The trustee has the authority to redirect the inheritance. Emily immediately shook her head. No. That's not real. Daniel looked at me carefully. Who's the trustee? I met his eyes. My lawyer. Emily let out a short laugh. So what? Lawyers can't just take someone's inheritance. I shook my head. No, they can't. Then I said the part she didn't understand yet. But they can enforce the rules your father wrote. Daniel rubbed his temples. So what does that mean now? I closed the wooden box gently. It means my lawyer reviewed the situation yesterday. Emily's breathing started getting faster. And I looked directly at her. He asked me one very important question. Daniel swallowed. What question? I repeated the lawyer's exact words. Did your son and daughter-in-law treat you with dignity and respect in the home your husband built? The air felt heavy. Nobody spoke. Finally, Daniel whispered. What did you say? I didn't answer immediately, because the truth hurt. I told him what happened, I said quietly. Emily stepped forward quickly. You're exaggerating. The officer raised a hand. Ma'am, please calm down. But Emily ignored him. She's twisting the story. I looked at her calmly. Did you pour soap on my head? She froze. The neighbors were absolutely silent now. Emily's mouth opened then closed. Daniel slowly turned toward her. Emily, did you? She stammered. I had slipped. I held her gaze. And did you tell me you wouldn't cook for an old woman anymore? Her face turned red. That's not what I meant. Daniel covered his face with his hands. Oh my God. I looked back at my son. I didn't lie to the lawyer. Daniel's voice broke. So what happens now? I hesitated. Because even I didn't fully know yet. My lawyer is reviewing whether the conditions of the trust were violated. Emily whispered nervously. And if they were? I answered honestly. The inheritance could be reassigned. Daniel's eyes widened. To who? I didn't answer immediately. Because the truth shocked even me when I first heard it. There is a second beneficiary written into the trust. Emily grabbed Daniel's arm. See? It's probably some charity. But Daniel looked at me carefully. Mom, who is it? I finally spoke the name. My daughter. Emily's grip tightened instantly. Laura, she shouted. Laura, who had been standing quietly beside the car, looked surprised too. Daniel blinked. Laura's in the trust? I nodded slowly. As a backup beneficiary. Emily looked like she might explode. That's insane. She doesn't even live here. I stayed calm. The trust doesn't require her to. Daniel looked devastated. So if the lawyer decides the rule was broken? I finished the sentence gently. Everything could legally pass to Laura instead. Emily's face turned completely pale. No, she whispered. Then she suddenly turned toward Daniel. Tell her she's bluffing. But Daniel wasn't looking at her. He was staring at the ground. Because deep down, he knew the truth. But what happened later that evening shocked everyone even more. Because my lawyer called me with an update about the trust. And what he discovered in the legal records proved something that would completely decide who deserved the house. And when Emily heard the final decision, she completely lost control. That evening, the house was quiet again. The moving trucks had already taken most of Daniel and Emily's belongings away. Boxes, furniture, and bags filled the driveway earlier that day. And by sunset the place looked almost empty. Laura and I were sitting in her living room when my phone finally rang. I looked down at the screen. It was my lawyer. My heart started beating faster. Laura noticed immediately. Mom, is that him? She asked softly. I nodded. Then I answered the call. Hello. Mrs. Carter, my lawyer said calmly on the other end. I've finished reviewing the trust documents and the incident you described. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Everything suddenly felt very real. Laura leaned closer, trying to read my face. Yes, I whispered into the phone. And there was a short pause. The trust has a very clear clause regarding elder mistreatment in the family home. I closed my eyes for a second. My husband's voice echoed in my mind. This house must always be a place of respect. My lawyer continued. Based on your testimony and the supporting statements from witnesses, the condition has been violated. Laura gasped quietly. My chest tightened. So what happens now? I asked. His answer came calmly. The primary inheritance rights of Daniel and his spouse are suspended. I swallowed hard. And the secondary beneficiary? Another short pause. Your daughter, Laura, becomes the new beneficiary under the trust. Laura covered her mouth in shock. Mom. But my lawyer wasn't finished. There is also another provision. My stomach twisted. What provision? The trustee has the authority to permanently remove individuals who violated the trust from future ownership claims. The words felt heavy. You mean? I whispered. Yes, he said gently. Daniel and Emily can no longer inherit the house or the investment fund. Laura stared at me. Tears were forming in her eyes. I took a deep breath. Thank you for explaining everything. I told the lawyer quietly. When the call ended, the room stayed silent for several seconds. Laura looked at me like she didn't know what to say. Mom, I never wanted this. I placed my hand on hers. I know. She shook her head slowly. This was supposed to be Daniel's. Yes, I said softly. It was. At that moment, someone knocked on the door. Laura stood up slowly and walked to the entrance. When she opened it, Daniel was standing there. And Emily was right behind him. Daniel's eyes looked exhausted. Red from crying. Mom, we need to talk, he said. Laura stepped aside, and they walked into the living room. Emily looked around nervously. Did the lawyer call yet? She asked quickly. Daniel looked at me with fear in his eyes. What did he say? I took a slow breath. Then I told them the truth. The trust has been reviewed. Emily grabbed Daniel's arm. And I looked at my son. The inheritance has been reassigned. Daniel's shoulders dropped. To who? He whispered. Before I could answer, Emily snapped. Obviously it's still us. I looked at her calmly. No. The room went completely still. Emily blinked. What? I spoke slowly so there was no confusion. The house and the investment fund now belong to Laura under the trust. Emily's face turned ghost white. That's impossible. Daniel stared at Laura in shock. Laura. She looked just as uncomfortable. I didn't ask for this, she said quietly. Emily suddenly exploded. This is a setup. She pointed at me. You planned this. Daniel shouted. Emily, stop. But she wasn't stopping. You turned your own kids against each other for money. I stood up slowly. No, I said firmly. You did that when you chose cruelty over kindness. Emily shook her head wildly. No. No. This isn't happening. Daniel looked at the floor. Is there any way to fix it? He asked quietly. The pain in his voice almost broke my heart. But I had to tell the truth. The lawyer said the decision is final. Emily suddenly dropped to her knees in front of me. Please, she cried. Don't do this. Daniel looked shocked. Emily. She grabbed my hands desperately. We'll apologize. We'll treat you better. Just change it back. Tears rolled down her face. But I gently pulled my hands away. This wasn't my decision anymore, I said softly. It was your choices. Daniel's voice cracked. Mom, I'm sorry. And hearing those words hurt more than anything Emily had ever said. But what happened the next morning shocked all of us again. Because Daniel returned alone. Without Emily. And the thing he told me at the door proved he had finally understood the lesson his father tried to teach him. A lesson about respect, family, and consequences. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Laura's house was quiet again, but my mind was still full of everything that had happened the night before. The arguments, the tears, the anger, and Daniel's apology echoing in my ears. I sat by the kitchen window with a cup of coffee, watching the morning light slowly spread across the yard. A part of my heart still hurt. No mother ever wants to see her child fall like that. But sometimes, life teaches lessons that parents cannot. Around 9 a.m., there was a knock at the door. Laura looked at me. Are you expecting someone? I shook my head slowly. She walked to the door and opened it. A second later, she turned back toward me. Mom, it's Daniel. I stood up slowly. When Daniel walked into the room, I immediately noticed something different. Emily wasn't with him. His shoulders looked heavy, but his eyes were clearer than the day before. Mom, he said quietly. I gestured toward the chair. Sit down. He sat across from me at the kitchen table. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he looked up. I didn't sleep last night, he admitted. I nodded gently. Neither did I. He rubbed his hands together nervously. Emily left. Laura looked surprised. Left? Daniel nodded. She went to stay with her sister. I stayed quiet and let him continue. She's furious about the trust, he said. She kept saying you stole our future. He shook his head slowly. But the more she talked, the more I realized something. He looked directly at me. She was never talking about family. His voice softened. She was only talking about money. Laura leaned against the counter, listening carefully. Daniel took a deep breath. Last night I went back to the house after the movers left. My heart tightened. The house felt empty, he continued. But for the first time in years, it also felt peaceful. I understood exactly what he meant. He looked down at the table. Then I walked into the bathroom. His voice cracked slightly, and I remembered the soap. The room fell silent. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. I kept asking myself one question, he said. What kind of son lets someone treat his mother like that? I felt tears forming in my eyes, but I stayed quiet. He looked up again. I failed you, Mom. Hearing that hurt, but it also felt honest. I should have stopped it the first time Emily disrespected you, he continued. Instead, I stayed quiet. Laura spoke gently. You were trying to keep the peace. Daniel shook his head. No. Then he said something that showed how much he had changed. I was choosing comfort over courage. I reached across the table and placed my hand on his. You're here now, I said softly. He nodded. I didn't come to ask for the house back. That surprised me. I didn't come to argue about the trust. He looked at Laura. You can keep everything. Dad built it, and you've always respected Mom. Laura looked emotional but didn't speak. Daniel turned back to me. I came here for one reason. I waited. He stood up slowly. And then something happened that shocked Laura. My grown son knelt down in front of me. Mom, he said quietly. I'm sorry. Tears rolled down his face. Not because we lost the house. His voice trembled. But because I forgot what kind of woman raised me. I placed my hands on his shoulders. Daniel. But he continued. You spent your life protecting me. And when you needed protection, I stayed silent. Laura wiped her eyes quietly. Daniel took a deep breath. I don't expect forgiveness today. Then he said the most important sentence of all. But I promise you something. I looked at him carefully. What? He stood up again. From now on, I will never allow anyone to disrespect you again. The kitchen stayed quiet for a moment. Then I stood up and hugged my son. A long hug. Not because everything was fixed, but because he had finally learned the lesson his father wanted him to understand. Respect, family, and consequences. Later that week, Daniel moved into a small apartment nearby. Emily never returned to the house. Laura eventually helped me move back into my home. And for the first time in years, that house truly felt peaceful again. Because sometimes the strongest revenge isn't anger. It's standing up for yourself and letting life teach the lesson. And if there's one thing I learned from this whole story, it's this. Respect in a family is not optional. It's the foundation that holds everything together. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because stories like this remind us of something important. Kindness to our parents and grandparents is not just love. It's a responsibility. Red Heart.